Hello.
Hey, Will, how's it going?
Evening, everybody.
Good evening.
So far, the staff to committee member ratio of this meeting is pretty healthy. So we'll wait a few minutes, obviously. We'll be with you shortly. Well, good evening, everybody. Nancy, I guess I would ask if there are, I know that we're probably waiting for a couple of the other Planning and Zoning Committee commission members from the committee to join, or I think we're getting pretty close to having a full vote.
Yes, there were 3 members that were not going to be able to attend.
Okay,
Oh, actually now 2, because Colin's in the meeting.
terrific.
So,
Okay, so it's about 3 minutes after 6, and I know our first consultant team, we're scheduled to get going at 6:10. So I'll provide a few introductory comments and a little bit of a roadmap for what's going on this evening with our interviews. So for those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Brad Power, and I'm the director of the Community Development Department. And on behalf of all of us in the department, we want to thank you for taking the time both this evening and throughout this project to help us craft a completely new development code for the city of Englewood. It's a huge undertaking. It's not done every day, and we appreciate in advance the time and attention you'll give to this entire project. But tonight's exciting because it represents a pretty interesting start, and we're going to be talking to 2 very well qualified firms who are interested in helping us along the way. So one of the things I wanted to start off with and just mention is that we've rechristened this project. Every project needs a name, and we're calling this CodeNext. So it implies that we are really trying to look forward to the future of the next generation of the evolution of the built environment in Englewood. And this is the first redrafting of our Unified Development Code since 2004. And even back then, it wasn't looked at from beginning to end. There were major parts of it that were updated, but this really represents the first true complete update of the code in a generation. And so we thought, given the pace of change in the community and just the change in development standards that are in a lot of communities these days, we thought it was an opportune time in this part of Englewood's history to take a look at the code and put it in a good spot for a next generation of guiding development. As I said, we're going to be speaking with 2 firms tonight. The first is Gould Evans from Missouri, and White & Smith, also the lead firm, will also be from Missouri. And the way that we're doing this evening is, so in order for give the committee the most opportunity to listen and absorb most of what you can in terms of the presentation, we're going to ask the consultants a series of 10 questions, and that will be on a rotational basis from our planning staff. So they will introduce themselves as they ask each of their first questions, and they'll lead the consultants through that. After about an hour or so, we're going to reserve about 15 minutes in case there are any unanswered or any clarification or unaddressed questions that the committee may have that would like to ask the consultants to respond to, and also give them a chance to ask us any questions that they may have in terms of the work that we envision with them. So the consultant teams are, I think the first one may be here. Is the Gould Evans group available and ready to go?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So again, for the committee members, before we turn it over to the questions and just get started, are there any clarifications or things that I said that didn't make sense, or does anybody else have any questions about how this evening's going to work? You have your score sheets. We'll talk a little bit about that after both consultants have made their presentations and during the discussion period a little bit later on in the evening. But can I answer any questions at this point before we turn it over to the interviews? Okay, seeing not, we'll start the interview with Gould Evans. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here this evening. And we'll start with Brooke Bell.
Hello, my name is Brooke Bell, and I'm a senior planner with the Community Development Department. And as Brad said, we're going to lead you through a list of 10 questions, starting with one from me, and then we'll be going around and some of our other planners will be asking you questions. So the first question for Gould Evans is, thank you for your interest in the CodeNext Unified Development Code project and taking this time this evening to talk with us. Please introduce yourself and your team that is here tonight as well, and any background on your firm that you would like us to know.
Well, I might lead off. My name's Graham Smith. I'm an associate principal with Gould Evans. and I lead our planning studio, or as we call it, the Studio for City Design. And for the last 30 plus years, we've been engaging communities in all sorts of city building endeavors, including comprehensive plans, urban design plans, and a mainstay of our work has always been writing development codes. And Chris Brewster, who you'll meet in a minute, leads that work. A little bit of background about us. In addition, in those 30 years that we've been working with communities, we've focused on those 3 areas of interest, I'll say. We use what we consider to be a design-based approach to all of our work. And so you'll hear more about that tonight. But really it's about being able to document and show the community and educate them through a process to allow them to make the best decisions for their community, whether we're talking about large-scale planning, whether we're talking about urban design, whether it's creating new districts or new street types or building typologies, or whether we're crafting a code like we would like to do for you all. In addition to those 3 mainstays of comprehensive planning, urban design, and code work, over the last 20 years, we have been engaged in on-call planning services for a variety of communities. And we think this is a very important aspect of our work because not only do we get to craft codes for communities and do planning work for communities, we get to sit on your side of the table as city staff and engage commissioners like you all on this call to make communities better from that side of the table as well. It's an invaluable tool for us to learn about how communities are using codes, using their existing codes. It also helps us in a lot of ways meet our targets of really simplifying the regulations, but providing that flexibility for communities to achieve their vision, as much like you have done in your comprehensive plan. In addition to that, we're heavily engaged in our communities that we live in and in Kansas City, Missouri, in which we office in. And so with that, a little bit about myself. I've been with the firm for just about 20 years. And between Chris and I'm the newbie at the firm. So we've got a lot of, I'll say, longevity on our side in working together and working with the same firm and have the resources of a 150-person design firm with multiple offices across the country that we tap into those expertises and those experiences as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Graham. I'm Chris Brewster. I've been at Gould Evans for 6 months longer than Graham, so a little over 20 years as well. I came from a city. I was at the City of Lee Summit where I worked in the law department. I am a planner and an attorney. So at Lee Summit, I developed my passion for doing codes because we were working under a particularly difficult code in a period of very rapid growth and high stress. And I was working with Public Works and the Community Development Department. And we were doing a code rewrite at that time as well. So I've been on the staff side of an overall comprehensive rewrite. And since coming to Gould Evans, I've been fortunate to continue public sector work, which is what our group loves. And we have a passion for helping communities make good decisions. And that's what we do think the code is about. And we look forward to sharing more of our approach. And I'll turn it over to our Front Range team member, Matt Ashby, to introduce himself and his firm.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having us. My name's Matt Ashby, and I'm a planner with a firm called Ayers. And we are here on the team to represent and round out the overall team with skills in not only urban planning, but also providing civil and transportation engineering, as well as economic development perspective. Codes are a huge factor in shaping the overall growth of a community and economic development issues, and we just want to make sure that that topic remains front and center. A little bit of background about me. I've been on the consulting side now for just over 6 years. I did spend 15 years on the local government side in your chairs and was planning director up in Cheyenne for 10 of those 15 years. And I can pretty confidently say that I'm likely one of the only people on this interview panel or teams that has been on the receiving end of a unified development code update. I have had to actually implement and take a code update and actually roll it out to what is a fairly conservative community up in Cheyenne. And one of the things that did for me was really challenged me to be fluent in explaining the reasons why. Why is this code important? What are we trying to achieve? And I think that's an important skill to keep front and center, because we're constantly communicating with our public, members of the public, as well as industry users like developers and elected officials, but making sure we're effectively communicating the logic behind the code is vitally important to making sure that it's successful.
Okay, if there's nothing further, I will turn it over to Will Charles.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Will Charles. I'm a planner too with the department. And my question for you guys tonight is, the request for proposal stated a targeted and incremental process for updating the UDC, or the Unified Development Code, is envisioned. Please explain your approach to this process and how the volume of information will be presented and decisions will be made. Additionally, how will City Council be involved in your process?
I will take that one and let Graham and Matt chime in. I'll start with the volume of information. The most important product or deliverable we will leave you with, and we say this on all of our development codes because we really mean it, is the table of contents. So we start there. We start looking at your current code, how it's organized, how it works, how topics relate, where we can simplify and get related things working better together, and to get the code in working order with a table of contents. That becomes our roadmap for managing all of the information that you reference, and there will be a lot of it. And that guides our work product. We also think that's one of the most important products we can leave you, because that, you know, the code will be something that's a living document. It will need to be amended over time, and the well-organized table of contents will let you have a very, very long shelf life for the code. From there, we will use a prioritization strategy where we start to group topics, similar topics together. When we get to the end, we want this to be a well-integrated document. So the last thing we want to do is be drafting sections in isolation that don't end up communicating to one another. And so when we get to the end, we want that table of contents to basically guide to make sure we have a well-integrated code. Now, that doesn't mean in the interim we can't raise certain topics or groups of topics to the front burner. We can't carve some off that need longer facilitation and discussion with your community and different stakeholders, or some that might need to go a little bit faster to get to the final point. But we're going to still get to the end with a well-integrated product. We don't want the sections existing in isolation. So that third level is then figuring out the who, what, and when of who we talk to. I think our proposals share that we do view public engagement on codes differently than a typical planning project. It's about getting the right information in the right hands at the right time. And not everyone needs to see every detail of the code and comb through it. So we want to make sure we're talking at a very high conceptual level about how we're implementing your plan with the general public. We might talk about hot button issues with policymakers, the Planning Commission and Council that you referenced. And we may talk in great detail with focus groups or stakeholder communities or a technical committee on of staff and pour over every word of that. So those three levels of information kind of guide how we roll out an engagement process. And then the last part is we want to get to the end with no surprises. So informing the council and planning commission through executive summaries of what sections are being updated and why. Another tool we've grown to use that builds off that table of contents is what's called a section map, where we'll essentially take anything that's in your current code and marry it over. Just map the sections and then give brief comments about what's changing and why. And the reason we do that is we're often faced with people that are introduced to something we're wanting to adopt. They think it's being invented out of whole cloth. They may not realize that your community has had standards on this topic for years, and we're actually reducing them or improving them in some way. So that's an overall picture of how we approach the multitude of different information that we're going to encounter. And I'll let Matt and Graham chime in on anything else.
I don't have anything to add.
Yeah, I guess I would add, for me, it is the adoption ordinance. It's kind of the one really important piece. So my role on the team is really to keep an eye on the process as it's moving forward to get you through to that adoption and implementation stage. So while Chris and Graham are juggling the day-to-day ins and outs of drafting the code and working through all of the nuances with that, my role on the team is actually to kind of stand back a little bit and watch the process from a little bit of a distance, and making sure that as we are approaching that end state where this thing is becoming real, and it could be something that is influencing the built environment for years to come, that we're anticipating any concerns or issues that might be coming up, and really monitoring that political side, so that we have the ability to get this project across the finish line. I would say that development codes are one of the more tricky and complicated projects that any of us as planners will work on. And just making sure that we are effectively messaging and communicating regarding the concerns that any individuals might have is my role to make sure that we're managing that effectively.
Thank you. I will turn it over to John for the next question.
Hello, my name is John Voberil, and I'm a senior long-range planner with the Community Development Department. My question is, the RFP asked for a designated facilitator for public meetings. Who on your team will fulfill this role? What is their approach and experience in discussing difficult and diverse land use opinions and building consensus?
Well, I would be the project manager, and I will say that all of us on the team are experienced and are comfortable in front of a public setting and difficult public settings. And Graham alluded to our on-call planning. We're often in that hot seat, and we are all comfortable in that. However, I would be the project manager doing the day-to-day work, and I think you've kind of heard a little bit and have some hints of who our lead facilitator is, and it would be Matt, because of his experience as a past director and managing one of these, and we would want to lean on his skills and messaging very heavily. So I'll turn it over to him for some specifics.
Yeah, again, having been through this experience firsthand in a community that is maybe could be described as somewhat hostile to planning principles, absolutely comfortable in the hot seat. The key thing that we like to do is make sure to dig down to the root of what the individual concerns are. What we do is really approach each group or audience in a way that identifies what their biggest concerns are, and to be able to understand really what motivates them in terms of what their drivers are. For developers, there's probably a financial interest, density, and really looking at that bottom line. And that's not inherently a good or bad thing. I think we need to remember not to attach a good or bad label to individuals' values, but it's important to make sure that we hear them and that we're able to adequately and accurately address their questions and concerns and how the code might implement or influence their lives on a day-to-day basis.
The only thing I might add on to that, it goes back to our first response on managing the information. We do think it will be very important to, in an engagement strategy up front, to begin to establish the parameters for those different groups that we will talk to. Which groups are we talking to at a very high conceptual level, and in which case we're often reinforcing the comprehensive plan. Your plan is a little bit old, but not old enough that people would be thinking of changing policies yet. So we are doing a code to implement all the policies that were established. So that high level group would be communicated in that way, and different strategies and different tools would be used, versus the people involved in a focus group might be really pouring over some details in the weeds, and we'd have to be looking at, you know, options and approaches and weighing the pros and cons of different options and approaches with those groups.
Yeah, I would tag onto that a little bit. This process is probably one of the most educational processes that any of us will go through in the planning realm. It really does cause you to stand back and say, why are we doing this? Why do we have a 10-foot setback? Is there a purpose or reason that is driving, you know, those dimensional standards? And being able to be equipped and also help staff be equipped to answer those questions as far as why are you regulating this, really is important to be able to explain the logic behind the code. And I think that perspective comes from all three of us having local government experience and day-to-day interaction with developers at a front counter, because this isn't just an academic exercise. It really is driving real life decisions and impacts in our community. So the least we can do to our stakeholders is be able to explain the logic behind what we are regulating. So I think that's also a huge component of facilitating positive discussions.
And I might quickly just add, Matt said something very important there, and what you guys are on top of already from what we've seen, the things that you've produced, is the education component. Building on the things that you to get the word out there about what the code does and what it doesn't do, the assessment you've already done on your own code, trying to identify those issues and challenges that you're having today. We really see this as an educational opportunity to pivot and start to show people and discuss with the community what those potential solutions are. There's many ways to address a lot of these issues, and so we want to help them understand what's best for Englewood and how do we move those forward into actually getting in the code and implementing their vision. So
yeah, I would just add on to that. The videos are great as far as being a good way to communicate with the general public. One of our recent projects, we actually had the city manager, who is an interesting character in and of himself, but he ended up running a Goldilocks skit on video where he was talking about missing middle housing. So being able to reach people where they're at and you know, kind of make things a little bit more fun than they might otherwise be in a development code setting is certainly something that we look to innovate with and look for those creative solutions as to how to communicate.
Now to bat, Eric Sampson.
Hi, I'm Eric, excuse me, Eric Sampson, Planner 2 with Community Development. So the city is building a project webpage using the Bang the Table platform. The RFP requires a selected consultant to provide weekly updates, graphics, and other information to keep the project website current and the public engaged. Who on your team will provide this content, and could you explain the type of weekly information that the city can expect?
Thanks, Eric. That will be a group effort on who will provide the content, but we'll be looking to Matt and his group to be the clearinghouse for all of that. And I think that the different types of content we would expect on a weekly basis it's going to be something we would need to map out in the engagement process. One of the things that we really guard against in these projects is losing momentum. So when we do get a higher profile face on this project, we're going to want to be keeping the content coming steadily. So that engagement process will need to set that up. I will tell you though, from my perspective, there will be periods of times where we need to go a little bit silent to be working on the minutia of how all the code comes together. So I think having that, though, again, those three levels of communication, we're going to want to make sure our high level conceptual ideas are spaced out within that time period so we can be updating people on what's going on. We will need to make sure that our specific issues that we're engaging with focus groups are set up in logical places throughout the project so we can be setting up those updates periodically. And then some weeks it might just be, we've been working on updating the wireless communications facilities section of the plan, and it's highly technical and we aren't making substantive changes, but we're just trying to get it to work better. And that might be an update for a week, and it might be fairly boring and dry. Not everything in the code's really exciting, but we'll try to make it so with Matt's help. With that, Matt, I'll turn it over to you on some of the strategies you've used to spice things up.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can make wireless telecom exciting and interesting, but I think Chris is right in that when we start out with the project, what we'll want to do is basically map out a calendar of website updates so that we are prepping those in advance. I think there is a real ease that those updates could slip and slide unless you are very deliberate in making sure that they are planned out. And what I would want to do is make sure that we are building 6 to 8 weeks in advance of content so that you have that pretty much ready to go. As Chris mentioned, we will have items that will be a little bit more substantive, that will have engagement questions and discussion, but we can definitely build some of those slower weeks out in advance so that they're essentially asking questions or exploring topics that we know are of interest to the community, including things like ADUs, fencing standards. You've got the videos that you as staff have done. We just want to make sure to reinforce some of those ideas as well. But we're definitely comfortable creating our own video content. We would produce that internally in our shop, working with your city PIO or communications office to make sure that we're meeting any standards that you have. But really working to provide video intros to key issues and then engaging through key questions and discussion opportunities through the Bang the Table format.
I might just add that a couple of the things that Matt touched on as maybe a specific example is on past projects we've worked on with codes, we can actually create those video tours is something that we put as an example into our proposal, where if people can't attend a tour in person, we can video those and put those online, or even create the tour virtually and put that online so that people can participate through that method as well. So there's all kinds of opportunities to get messages out there and allow participation through the website itself. And then the final thing I would add is I think we've only had to use them a couple times maybe on a code project, but we do have an in-house graphic design group that could support Matt and his team as they put that information in those graphics together. So.
All right, thanks. John, I think it's back to you, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right. Describe the approach you will take to expand mixed-use areas beyond current boundaries or establish new missing middle style regulations in transitional areas.
I'll start with the first one, the missing middle housing, because it is something we've spent a lot of time working on with other communities, so we have some experience there. I think my first observation would be your plan gives great guidance on what needs to be done in certain areas. The having it not be a land use base and having it be a neighborhood district-based plan is a great filter to begin talking about some of those issues. And when we turn to your code, it begins to look like it's set up very well for that with the R1, R2, and R3, and with each of those having subsets of that. And so we would see that structure as becoming the key to missing middle housing. When we go to look at what those standards actually do, that's where things get a little murky and messy, and we're losing focus on what we're trying to achieve. So we would very much see a building type approach, really simplifying your current standards. We think you have far too many residential standards that are making distinctions without real meaningful differences. Back to Matt's question of why are we regulating this? And so we would start there by looking at housing types. That might be something that we do some tours on, where we go look at projects and are actually measuring and dimensioning projects that we think are replicable in your community, or even existing projects in your community as well. And from there, the component that makes missing middle and mixed use in general come together is urban design, placemaking. The only reason lots of different things, whether it's different housing types, different scales of buildings, different uses, the only reason they can mix compatibly is because there's a great place, a great public realm there. And so that's the other part where we focus on, I think the question is hinting at, hey, if we're expanding into areas or we're adding new types, that's going to create stress and pressure on a particular area, which it absolutely will. So the conversation needs to be focused on what are the fewest key things that make this place great, whether it's frontages that relate to the public realm, whether it's the design of the streetscape itself, or whether it's some characteristics of the buildings. And let's focus on those standards. And then people open up to having more things mix in. So I think that's a big picture view of how we approach them. I think our standards can kind of get too complex too quickly if we don't take a step back and go, why would we even want to mix things to begin with? What are we trying to achieve? I think that hits on what the essence of that question was, but I'd be happy to redirect if not. Matt, do you have anything to add, or Graham?
I do. I just want to make sure that the group heard kind of what Chris was saying there. Essentially, with some of these more complex issues, we want to regulate the fewest key components that we can to make a great place. And I think that is really important from a implementation standpoint, that you're not getting overly wrapped up in what the code says, but you're making sure that you do those key things really, really well. And I think that makes it easier from an implementation standpoint. Long range, when you think about staffing, you're going to have turnover. You're going to have new staff members that come into this process. And for them to understand the purpose behind the code, having the fewest key elements regulated simplifies and makes it so that you're achieving your objectives long term. Not just with the crew that's on the call today, but with the planners that come in years from now and have to implement that code as well. So that's just one item that caught my ear with the implementer's perspective, on my thought process.
Graham, you're muted.
You would think after a year and a half we would figure this out, but apparently I haven't. So I apologize for that. But I just wanted to add real quickly that at the top of the discussion, I mentioned that we use a design-based approach, and Chris mentioned in there the use of building types and different typologies, whether it's street types or open space types. And there's a couple things that we think this really achieves in this type of a process. And one is, as Matt alluded to and Chris both, is the simplicity. It allows us to simply illustrate and document and reach that level of technical specificity that you need in the code without being overly technical in its explanation and its explanation to the public. The other thing it allows us to do is to very simply show them what all this means. And so through that illustration and through those discussions of the regulations, but in that design-based or that typology-based approach, it's really a visual review of those things instead of just numbers and charts and tables and things like that. And don't get me wrong, we love tables because it simplifies things, but giving that illustration really takes it to the next level and allows people to see it as well as feel it. And so we think that's important.
And Graham, I guess I'm going to take a little bit of a guess that you all are going to ask a couple of questions about public engagement and things, maybe further. But in case you don't, what Graham had alluded to a little bit was this idea of taking community tours. One of the things that is so instructive for us is being able to get not only this committee that's on this call, but other elected officials, planning commissioners, your technical staff, engineers, public works, parks folks, out into neighborhoods so that we're not just talking about abstract numbers. We're actually experiencing places and being able to sense and feel what some of these regulations actually translate into in the real world. And so historically, we've done in-person tours. We've toured a number of different developments in the Denver metro area and along the Front Range. And, you know, it becomes a great opportunity for us to talk with different industry experts and really learn together about what the code means and how we, you know, implement an idea like missing middle housing that can really turn very academic very quickly. But if we're actually out experiencing those places, we have the ability to touch and feel and understand what those places are all about. And I guess one other thing that I didn't mention during the earlier question on facilitation, we like to end those tours at a local brewery or someplace that is more of a social atmosphere, so that we can have planners sitting across the table from developers, having a beer and just getting to know one another and talk about the things that you saw during the tour. It becomes really a community building exercise in addition to that educational component. So that's something that we build into all of our processes and feel it's really important to helping explore some of these new types of concepts like mixed use and missing middle.
And just to give Matt's point on measuring and experiencing a practical image, I've measured, walked off, paced off my neighborhood, my street, my porch many times over. And in fact, was just out doing it again this week to re-verify things that I thought I knew. And my wife said it looked like all the neighbors think I'm taking a field sobriety test as I'm walking up and down the street with my pacing my feet one in front of another. But you do need to, we need to check ourselves on details like that and make sure we understand what the three-dimensional impacts of these numbers and things that we're writing on paper are.
Well, I think I have the next question, but before I ask it, this is Brooke again. I wanted to just kind of look at our time, and actually we are like perfectly on time. You guys have answered half the questions with half the time, and I would like to leave, or we would like to leave, 15 minutes for some Q&A, both from our steering committee and perhaps you guys, but so we're doing all right as long as we keep moving forward at this pace. So here is my question, and it's a little bit similar to the last one. Will existing local neighborhood conditions be analyzed, including housing age, quality, conditions, and size?
Yes, they will be. We find that's a great tool to begin to get people to do just what we discussed, to look at their community with a more critical eye, whether that's good or whether that's bad, whether it's patterns we want to reinforce or whether it's things that might be lacking that we want to change. So analyzing existing housing types, building types, whether it's residential or commercial, will absolutely be part of it. I think as far as age and condition, I don't know that we would go into that great of detail. Those types of things are usually done when we're looking more towards redevelopment policies or things that would be outside of this code, unless I'm misinterpreting that. But usually what we're faced with on age and conditions are the first kickback when we use existing older places in a community as a model for new development is yes, but no one builds that way anymore. So what we would want to do is we would want to take some of those older things and pattern them off of new development in the Front Range area that are absolutely reflecting some of those same or older patterns, and then talk about why we may want to do it, where some of those would fit in. If you have areas that are a concentration of either declining housing stock or old housing stock, that might start to give us clues on where some of these new strategies are. But I think we would be leaning more heavily on your existing plans and policies to give us that information than we would be looking for it under this project.
Thank you. Let's see, I think up next is Will.
I think John's got the next one. But I don't mind asking it.
Okay, is it number 7?
Yeah.
I have 8.
Oh, all right. Well, then it is me. All right. How will you manage the creation or potential creation of non-conforming lots during the update process?
Yes, good question. Whether it came from John or Will, that's a great question. And it's always a touchy thing. I think one of the things we try to do first off is to not disrupt existing zoning to a great extent. So understanding your current zoning map will be a key thing we want to really understand to make sure anything that's changing in those districts that are widely used is looked at with greater scrutiny. The other thing so in a counterpart to that is we would try, if there's new things we need to be adding in or places where we think we need to make greater changes, we would look to try to do that in some of your least used zoning districts. So for an example might be if we think I might get the nomenclature wrong here, but your R2B was widely used, but your R2A wasn't. Those are fairly comparable districts that might have a similar intent. We would pick the one that's mapped the least to go influence where we want to put the greatest changes. So that's a little bit of a planner's punt, let's say, like, oh, we're not changing anything. This is just it's gonna be changed later through a process where someone might have to rezone to it. But it's also respecting that there's lots of things on the ground that are invested in that we don't want to change. That doesn't mean that nothing will change for existing zoning areas. It will. And to the extent we create non-conformances, we have to be pretty upfront and careful about it, go in with eyes wide open. The last thing I would say on that is we have used a strategy in some of our recent codes, and this came up in Brighton specifically, of the concept called a benign non-conformance. So at the time of rezoning to certain things, if you have a widespread use or building pattern in the area that's not in the new district, but in that particular application of it wouldn't cause any problems, you can grant them sort of greater grandfather status than they would just under your non-conforming situations. So we as planners often say, like, oh, don't worry, you're a non-conforming use, you don't need to worry about it. But people do, and sometimes legitimately, because there might be some reinvestment issues, and then other times it might be exaggerated. It's often thrown back at us that, oh, now I can't insure anything because I'm non-conforming. That's not exactly true either. So I think having that conversation outside of the immediate decision is important.
I would just add, from a technical standpoint, that's why we spend a significant amount of time documenting those different zoning districts and where they're mapped and the typical kind of lot configurations that are in there. And so that allows us to take that information and bring it back to the code rewrite and see where we can reduce the opportunities for non-conformance and still achieve the things that the community wants to achieve.
Thank you. The next question, I'm sure of it, is for John.
Yes. How many public meetings or steering committee meetings are you willing to commit to within your proposed budget? Do you envision any in-person meetings, or simply are they going to be digital format meetings?
We envision and we can't wait to do in-person meetings. I will say that right up front. And although those are the ones we do have to be careful and limit them, but we can't wait to get back and be doing more of those. The reason we would limit them is presentation. Our cost isn't the meeting itself or the time. It's preparing the presentation presentation material. It's preparing with staff and our stakeholder committee of how we want to map out that particular meeting. So I think having one of those monthly is probably, and I'm talking about just general engagement meetings, is probably a good benchmark to go by. If it's staff and stakeholder meetings or updates to debrief the planning commission on where we've been, those types of things are a little easier to do, and we frequently do more or add on as many of those. All that being said, this type of meeting that we've become accustomed to over the last year and a half certainly makes us far more accessible than we used to be. And we're willing to do as many of these that get us to the end result on the project. And I think if you talk to any of our past clients, you'll hear that as well, that we will go to great lengths to make sure we hit the end mark on these projects.
All right, well, I'll send that over to Eric then.
All right, so explain how you will model difficult land use concepts such as bulk plan regulations in a way that is understandable to a person just learning about planning and zoning concepts.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I might stumble on this one because I'm the simplicity guy. I'm always trying to simplify code. So I would go back to the first thing we need to do is, and what we've talked about in a lot of this discussion tonight is educate why are we doing this? What's important? So with bulk planes, it's one of two things. Either that particular building or adjacency is creating some actual impacts on the adjacent site, whether it's shadows or views or things like that. So that's one thing to visualize and illustrate, and keeping it as simple as possible, but connecting it to real world examples. So showing someone where there might be a bad example of it versus showing someone where there might be a better example where either the building was stepped back or had a different relationship to the side or whatever lot line you're dealing with. The second thing that those regulations are often doing is trying to scale a building appropriate to its site. In other words, that just the idea of it seems too large to me. And sometimes that was because it was change and you're not used to it. So I think that one's a little bit harder to deal with. That one we need to understand what your plan is saying and where your community is calling for more intense development. And in some of those areas, we might be in a situation where we're saying the bulk plane either needs to go away or needs to be larger, or we don't care about that issue as much in this circumstance because we're getting these other benefits out of it. So simple graphics, more complicated points about why we would care, and then showing good and bad examples of each, I think would be important.
Yeah, I would just add on, when I was a planning director and we were tackling some of these more complex issues, having the illustrations was essential to be able to help in getting everybody on the same page. We had to argue with our city attorney to enable us to be able to use some of those graphics, because the attorneys, they want to have everything written and lengthy paragraphs that describe exactly what it is they're talking about in words. They're not as comfortable with the illustrations. And what these guys through their graphic design shop were able to provide were those illustrations to help simply communicate the essence of the code in a way that is accessible to folks that are new to planning, as well as folks that have been in the profession for years. So
And
that really is key.
that brings up a good point as well. I think we will shift gears when we're doing graphics and material for the engagement or educating or informing why we're doing something versus the graphics that will go in the code. So the graphics that will go in the code, we'll put a finer tooth comb to them, and they also may be more simple and basic. The graphics that exist outside as an educational tool can be more exemplary or more show more details that aren't part of that specific regulation we're getting at. And then some of those things can live on after the code is written. One of the communities where the on-call planners for they had a very controversial neighborhood design debate going on. They were a part of our metropolitan area that was just ripe for the tear down, rebuild housing. Their location was prime, their housing stock was old, and so it was happening. So we went through a long, drawn out, and sometimes bloody facilitated discussion with the public and developers on where to land on some neighborhood design standards. And then when we did that, as Graham mentioned too, we were stuck implementing the code we drafted. So since then, we've started creating what we call neighborhood design briefs, where as the building official and I encounter interpretations of things that weren't, situations that weren't identified in this code, we can develop a series of graphics that supplement that. So there are these 1 or 2 page design briefs that talk about how you do things in a certain way. So different graphics for different types of deliverables, I think, would be important in that regard as well.
And I might add, from the logistical standpoint, not only the graphic that illustrates the intent of the regulation, but setting that in the context. So not just showing it on a single parcel or a single individual graphic, but actually showing that in a block configuration or a few block configuration. You saw a few of those things in our proposal, but really trying to set the ideas and the thoughts in the context in which they're maybe different or they're occurring in. So
yeah, I think the thing that I appreciated as a planning director was having, and actually, if you didn't catch that, Gould Evans did my code when I was planning director. And one of the things that we found was, in explaining the code, we had a sense that there were a number of hot topics that we encountered frequently with the community. And so these guys actually created a series of how-to sheets for us to basically help the counter staff be able to explain frequently encountered issues, just making it easier for us as planners to roll out the code and make it accessible and understandable to the community.
All right, thanks. Brooke, I think you got the last one.
Yes, so we are on question number 10, the last question, and we're doing pretty good on time, which is great. So the last question, and then we'll follow it up with questions from steering committee members. But the last question that we have is, how will you modernize the current Unified Development Code?
Let me think on that for a second here. Modernize is a tricky word. I think what we will do, I think our goal is to implement your plan. Whether that means modernize or whether that means be more direct, whether that means simplify, whether that means expand, is to be determined, I think, through the first few months of the process. We, Gould Evans, in our code practice, we've been reading codes for 25 years, in both Graham and I, and we've accumulated all of the different strategies. And so we do find ourselves to be pretty good copycats, taking the best of things that are new but working them into a practical way because we know how the day-to-day inner workings of a planning department, planning staff works. That's kind of why I hesitated on Modernize. We don't necessarily want to throw everything out. We need to make sure your system still keeps working the way it does. With that, I would say a community with a small built-out footprint, your code is probably far too complex. There's a lot of words in there that I think if our target might be 50%. Let's cut 50% of the words, and maybe 50% of the districts, as I mentioned, with your residential districts and what you have going on, and make sure that anytime we make a distinction, it's with an intent to do something distinct. We don't want to have the code just become a collection of standards. We want it to be a tool on how you build your community and why. So in that regard, I think it's no secret form-based codes have taught planners a great deal on how to modernize, and we love using all of those tools at our disposal. However, to Matt's point earlier, we want to make sure we do it in a very simple and intuitive way that's understood by the community that's impacted by these codes, that's understood by developers who use them, and that's understood easily by staff that has to implement it, and it has to deal with the difficult questions at the counter.
Yeah, and I guess I would just reiterate Chris's point that your community has defined its vision for the future, and it's defined the types of places that you want to create in your community through the neighborhood structure. And so the modernization or bringing your code current really should target on how do we create those places? What are the tools in the toolbox, in the zoning code that we need to create those places? It's not the code that's, I forget how old your code is right now, but it's not the code that created the community you once had 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's how are you creating the community that the community has defined for the future.
Great, thank you. Brad, do you have any where we're going next in terms of the steering committee questions?
Right, as Brooke mentioned, gentlemen, that's the conclusion of our formal questions. So at this point, I would ask the members of the steering committee if there are any questions that you may have, particularly ones that you maybe want to amplify on in terms of some of the answers or issues or areas that may not have been addressed. So we have a little bit of time for that, but we also want to make sure that we leave time for Chris, Matt, and Graham to ask us questions as well. So take it away if anybody has any questions.
I'd be interested to hear about your approach for integrating environmental sustainability into the codes, perhaps with examples from other communities you've worked in.
Yes, thank you. Environmental sustainability is a very multifaceted issue, let's say that. So we could be dealing with, particularly in a built-out community, some of your most sustainable things you can do would be to do the most you can with your existing buildings. So there's an environmental aspect of promoting reuse of existing buildings to the greatest extent we can. There's an environmental aspect to making sure buildings are built in an energy efficient way. That's often a difficult topic to regulate, but we're often in the mode of making sure we don't have any regulations that are impeding that. And here I'm talking about green building practices or building science practices that our architects in our firm keep us very informed on. Some of those may or may not be marketable right now, and we want to hesitate to regulate for those, but we certainly want to make sure there aren't any impediments to someone that wants to do it and wants to make that investment. So that's kind of dealing more with the building. The second big issue I think we encounter is stormwater and landscape elements in an arid community such as yours. There's a lot to be said on water conservation, and the Council of Governments is doing great work with the Water Wise program that's informing landscape codes and how we make sure any landscape provisions that we are putting in will survive in the Front Range climate, and B, are being planted and designed in a way that maximizes water efficiency. And then C, how do we manage the runoff impacts of that? So those are some key sustainable issues. I think the other one that planners always are advocating, maybe not always from a sustainability standpoint, but from a quality of life standpoint, is walkability and transportation options. Almost, I don't think I've ever done a code at Gould Evans that hasn't been pushing the envelope in that direction. And I think it's always good to remember that there's a big environmental impact on the footprint we leave on transportation as well. So those would be my three big issues: the buildings and energy use themselves, landscape, site design, and water use, and then transportation. If I've missed any, please fill in, or Matt and Graham, please feel free to elaborate.
Yeah, Chris, I would just reiterate the fact that AIRS does bring along our civil engineering team, as well as our transportation planning folks, to be able to have those conversations with those other allied professions, because we as a planning group can come up with a great solution and have a great idea, but in order to make sure that it meets the technical needs, we need to communicate with those specialists very effectively and make sure that we're talking about the same thing. So that presence of those individuals on our team, I really think is a value add for this process, and specifically looking at environmental sustainability issues.
And I guess the only thing I would add is, in a lot of ways, it's leveraging. I think one of the key points that we'll want to continue to work through with you all is leveraging the things that you're already doing in terms of using your existing infrastructure systems to support, and since we're all among friends here, I'll use the density word, but to support density where it's appropriate, and not just for density's sake, but to leverage your light rail stops, to leverage your infrastructure and do those things that are very sustainable for the community and for the environment. So we'll want to keep that in the back of our mind as we work through this as well.
Yeah, looking at the issue of sustainability and density, that comes right down to the question of accessory dwelling units. It's amazing how much of a environmental solution that one opportunity is, but oftentimes it doesn't come down to a zoning question. It comes down to a utilities question. Are the accessory dwelling units charge tap fees, system development fees as an extra unit, even though they're really not adding a significant additional burden onto the overall utility system? So being able to speak in those terms and understand those issues on that technical side, I think is critical to being able to advance some of those more sustainable options.
Well, I'll ask a question. Chris, I believe you alluded to working with the city of Brighton, I believe you mentioned earlier. Could you expand on what other communities that you've worked in Colorado relative to projects that have been similar in scope and scale as this one?
Yes, right now we're working with the city of Greeley. That project should be wrapping up in the next, sometime over the summer. They have targeted for adoption in September or October to go through adoption. So Greeley and Brighton are our most comparable. We've done several other planning projects in the Front Range and the metropolitan area as well. Graham or Matt, correct me if I'm missing. Well, Cheyenne, it's dated now to 2006 through 8 was when we were working on that project. I can't recall if there are others from our standpoint, and AIRS has some.
Yeah, we've done some updates for Durango. We're currently working on a height limit update in downtown Estes Park, which I think obviously is a issue that people are very value driven. So, that's a definite conversation between folks that say, hey, we need to increase heights, and other folks that say, I liked it the way it was when I got here. So that's definitely been an interesting process as well. Chris, another one that we've worked on is Fort Lupton as well in the area. And Graham, you've done some sign code updates and more strategic elements for some other communities as well.
Yeah, we've completed a sign code update for Evans, Colorado, and working with Matt and his team on their comprehensive plan update as well. And then we've also talked to them about updating or creating an ADU ordinance for them as well. We haven't started that, but that's one of the things that's on their books. So.
And Matt, thanks for the Fort Lupton reminder. I had a call with him today, so I should not have forgotten that one.
Thank you. Anybody else on the committee have a question or two?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Can you hear me?
Go for it, Bernie.
Yeah, Brad sort of, I think, was the first part of my question he just took. And the second part, is there any current, within the last 5-6 years, code updates nationally? It doesn't necessarily have to be a city comparable in size, but anything that you think addresses some of the concerns that we're dealing with that have been successful. I know Minneapolis is certainly one that's on my radar. I'd be curious to see if there are any additional ones and things that you think are pertinent to our study that's going on right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to mention the one that our team actually talked about when we got shortlisted for an interview, not because, and it might ruffle some feathers, because not because it's exemplary, but because they went to such an extent that I guarantee there are things that we can mine from that to apply to your context because they're your close neighbor. But Denver's code, that was a monumental effort, incredibly complex code. In that effort, I can't imagine that they didn't they turned over everything. They thought of every single possible thing. There's the universe. And now which of those things in that universe apply to Englewood and your specific neighborhoods? And how can we do it in a more simple way? I think that's one to look at. As far as and I think that one models a lot of the codes that we would look at in other cities. We're just finishing up one right now in Indianapolis. It's going for adoption over the next month or so. That was a transit corridor overlay where we did implement a lot of the missing middle housing and mixed use that we were talking about in this meeting. And they had recently redone their code in 2016 and 17. And what they found was it was too complex and it had a lot of conflicts in it for what they wanted to achieve in these key transit corridors. And so we went through and implemented a missing middle housing strategy in their more intense dwelling districts. And so we took a lot of ideas from some of the bigger city codes that have been looking at a building typology thing. But those are just some that jumped to my mind. I've got a whole library of codes in my files, and I'm always looking to add to it if some of you all know of great ones or great ideas you've heard of.
Thank you.
I have one quick question. How do you address short-term rentals?
So that's a very pertinent question. We have it going on in 2 of our on-call cities right now. And I would say it's one of 3 things. It's a land use issue in which we would address through the zoning code. It's a business licensing issue of which we would address not through zoning at all. And they're operating a business, and are they licensed and how? Or it's a property management, maintenance enforcement issue where we're trying to mitigate things that might be a result of short-term rentals. Within those 3 realms of how the city reacts to that is our solution. From there, it depends on what are the issues. Is it a location issue where it's appropriate in some areas but not in others? Then we know we need to address something through the zoning code to give that filter. If it's simply getting a handle on these businesses, where they are, how they operate, and having some accountability, that might tell us maybe we don't need a zoning strategy for it. If you have some of it going on and you're frequently fielding complaints, whether it's the public safety or planning office, that would tell us maybe it's a performance issue as well. So we're prepared to address it in certainly from the zoning standpoint if we need to. It does get pretty tricky managing what's short-term rental versus not short-term rental. What type of building is it going in versus not? It's one of those things that's just sort of exploded our comfort zone of the paradigms that we usually think in as planners. But certainly there's plenty of cities who have addressed it that we can look to for good ideas. But our experience has been it's one of those three things: a zoning issue, a business license issue, or an enforcement issue.
So with that, gentlemen, what questions do you have for us, perchance?
I guess I'll lead off with one of the first things we like to do. It's a twofold questions. What are the top 3 procedures that you often find yourself in where the outcome isn't necessarily in doubt? If you have any of those things that are more routine, whether it's a common BZA variance, whether it's a common special use permit that keeps coming through. And then from the planner side, what are the 3 issues that you spend your most time on with the least results?
Well, I'll take a stab at the second one. Obviously, right now we're dealing with a lot of our code is about 20 years old, and I think our parking portion may be older than 20 years old. And so right now, with sort of some of the changes we're seeing going on, just in society, we're getting a lot of pressure right now to reduce parking requirements, especially from developers on the residential side. So that's definitely something that just about every conversation on a multi-unit development starts out with, and it's a difficult one because it involves our department, which we're trying to keep up on current trends. It also involves our public works department, who is of course very concerned about the public right of way and overflow parking, and then we have the community that is divided somewhat on growth. So that's a real big one. The other one is, we are a community that in certain areas is seeing some scrape-off activity, especially with duplexes and triplexes. And so for some of those communities, even though that has been a use by right for 30 plus years, I shouldn't say, well, in many cases, 30 plus years. Much of the community doesn't even know that was ever allowed, even though it's been allowed for that period. And so now that economically and the market is headed that direction, they're seeing a lot of change in their neighborhoods. And they're, it depends on who you talk to, but a lot of them will say, I thought this was a one-story neighborhood, even though that has not been the fact for a long time. So we're struggling with that. And I'd invite anybody else to answer the first part of that question or add on to mine, but those are 2 big ones. Architectural, you could say architectural character or, design guidelines is part of that. Obviously, there's a lot of contemporary architecture happening right now. But I think it's more scrape-offs and new sort of, how building height and those kind of things, more so than just pure character. Anybody else?
The only thing I'd add to that, Brooke, is when you have in the R2 areas and things like that where this is happening, There's also the shade of the increased height of the building right next to them.
Yeah, bulk plane's an issue. Flat roofs are pretty common in some of our multi-unit developments or duplexes and triplexes. And that's different than the established character on some level, but so that's one of them. Certainly, yes. Thank you, Michelle.
I would add the in our MUB1 zone district, which is the downtown zoning district. Well, I believe it's in MUB2 as well. There is a ground floor retail requirement that over 50% of the built ground floor must be commercial or retail, and that's caused us a lot of problems because off of Broadway there's no market for that, and even sometimes on Broadway it can be a problem too. But we are going to be able to hopefully put a dent in that here. We're kind of going through a kind of a rezoning process for our Englewood station area, and we're going to try to nip that partially in the bud for you. You might have to do some additional work with that later.
Great. We're familiar with most of those issues, or all of them, yeah. And there are no easy answers, which you all know.
Other questions for us?
Yeah, I might just ask, somebody had mentioned the growth versus no growth division in the community. Can you guys, or what are you seeing in terms of how people are reasoning with the no growth? Is it just size? Is it traffic? Is it character? What's the underlying element of the no growth?
I think a lot of it is fear. There's a fear of other people's, whether they are poorer than me or maybe more successful than me and just different from me. And I bought here a long time ago, expecting it to stay the same, and it's radically changing. And they think, some of them even are afraid they're going to be somehow forced out.
To add on to, oh, sorry.
Agree with that. I would agree with that. I think a part of it too is that we really have a very mixed population. We have a lot of more elderly people and a lot of new young families, and that adds to the whole problem.
I will mention, as people, the people that come in that want to talk about these new developments when they have their concerns, size does seem to be one of the larger ones as far as the number of, comments or concerns that we have is about the size of those structures comparative to what, in their mind, their neighborhood was always going to be, single family, 1,000 square foot or less homes. And then, it's, these new larger structures.
Right.
I guess one additional question from me, our group focuses a lot on downtown redevelopment and, different redevelopment initiatives. Can you describe the types of redevelopment that you're anticipating along Broadway and, what you see coming as far as the linkage to the code update?
I could maybe address that one. So we are in the process probably of completely reinventing the entire central portion of the city, the downtown commercial core. We have three kind of sub areas that, even though they're adjacent to one another, they've had a very difficult time relating to one another. So going from west to east, the first one is the city center area, which is concentrated around the station area. And it's a former old mall site that was redeveloped 20 years ago. And we're going through a pretty intensive process now to set it up for its new redevelopment. Because significant portions of it have been left behind. It's all surface parking. The density just does not work for a trans-oriented development, an effective one. So we've selected a master developer out of Portland that we're working with to try to put together a long-term master development agreement for that entire redevelopment. The central areas, of course, is our historic downtown area along South Broadway. which has really been fascinating the last 5 years in my tenure here, to really see the rapid transformation of the entrepreneurialism in that corridor. It is a thriving independent business community area. And that's not only retailers, but restaurants getting going. And it's really actually turning into a bit of a regional destination for some of those businesses. And so we want to make sure that we have the ability to capitalize on that and make sure that we're preserving those opportunities for that smaller scale independent business, because that's the commercial history and heritage along that area. And then just to the east is the medical district with 2 large hospitals, which is a lot of the location, as well as a lot of infill multifamily redevelopment that's happening purely on a market basis. We're not intervening on that at all on behalf of the city. So one of the things that we've done just last November was the voters in a district, and those 3 districts, formed a downtown development authority. And so that group has just been stood up in the last month. So they're getting their feet underneath them, and we have the potential to do, a 30-year time frame for reinvestment in that area. And so we've done a lot of work to reposition and position, I should say, the entire central portion that's dominated by the commercial zone of our community for sustained investment, preservation, and new discovery over the next generation or so. And I think it's in everybody's interest to make sure that the code is giving us the best foot forward to making sure that those types of goals in those 3 areas, and as they relate to overall, is really effective, because we want to connect them far more effectively than they are now, especially non-auto connections. And that's going to be a big push in terms of future infrastructure investment in those 3 areas, is to link them. So the code is going to play a huge part of that. So I appreciate the question, because it's a really important one right now and very timely.
Yeah, no, that is really exciting to hear the DDA got stood up. As one of my other hats that I wear, I'm actually a contract staff executive director for the Windsor Downtown Development Authority. So definitely, thinking in that 30-year time frame about development initiatives, how zoning impacts redevelopment opportunities, and looking at how that then impacts the tax increment financing is definitely something that's near and dear to my heart. So that's exciting.
Terrific. Well, on that note, if we could, I want to make sure that we are being mindful and fair to the other group that's going to be joining us in a few minutes. So we are right at our ending time of 7:25. So we timed it just about right. So gentlemen, Chris, Matt, Graham, thank you for joining us this evening. I thought it was a really interesting and productive conversation. And we wish you all the best for the rest of the evening, and we will be in touch soon. And thanks for joining us this evening, gentlemen. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. For the committee members, we'll take a 5-minute break. So if you could be back here and ready to go with our next team at 7:30, we'd appreciate it. 5 minutes. Thanks.
So for the White and Smith team, the steering committee was just taking a few minutes break in between. They should be back in a minute or two, and we'll get started.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening, folks. Bear with us just a couple of minutes for a few last folks to rejoin us. Appreciate it.
Sounds good. Thanks.
So in the interest of time, I'll just ask, are Suzanne, Carl, or Michelle back on and just not on camera? Are you back yet? Carl's there. Great. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Suzanne. Okay, we'll count on Michelle joining us momentarily, and we'll get started in the interest of time. Good evening again, everybody. My name is Brad Power. I'm the Director of the Community Development Department for the City of Englewood. Welcome to our team from White and Smith. We appreciate your time this evening. We're looking forward to having a good discussion with you. I want to just briefly introduce a little bit of the format of what we're going to be doing. For about the next hour or so, we're going to have our planning staff rotate through a series of 10 questions. So we will have plenty of time for you to provide some extended answers to the planners' questions. And after that, we want to give the committee, the steering committee, the opportunity to ask any follow-up questions that they may have for you. But we also want to make sure that we reserve some time toward the end for you to ask us any questions that you may have in terms of where the city is positioned and the background of the project, or any other questions that you may have. So between the hour of the 10 formal questions and the 15 minutes of the follow-up, that's our agenda for this evening. So if that comports with your expectations and opportunities to have a good conversation, at this point, I will turn it over to Brooke Bell, and he will lead us off with the first question for you this evening. Brooke, take it away.
Hi, my name again is Brooke Bell. I'm a senior planner in current planning here with the Community Development Department. And I'll ask the first question. Thank you for your interest in the CodeNext Unified Development Code project and taking time this evening to talk to us. Please introduce yourself and your team that is here tonight, as well as any background on your firm and what you would like us to know.
Thanks, Brooke. My name is Mark White. I am a senior partner with White and Smith in our Kansas City office. We are, White and Smith is organized as a law firm, but we're really planners. I'm an AICP planner in addition to having a law degree, and our focus and specialty in our firm is code drafting. We've done over 150 complete development code updates in similar projects like this in over 36 states around the country. So this kind of project is really what we do. We've been in business for over 15 years, 16 years now. I've been doing this for over 31 years in my career. I started my career in 1990. And so I have a long experience, applying the law to development codes, writing development codes in ways that are user friendly, working closely with staff and the general public to get them up to date. So in addition to that, we've got a lot of experience in Colorado. We're currently doing a code update with Westminster, and we're working with our teaming partners here, Logan Simpson, on a number of other projects around the state and in the Mountain West right now. So we've got long experience with Colorado, and for what it's worth, I'm also a graduate of Thornton High School. So I'm in Kansas City now, but actually spent some time in Colorado when I was younger. Joining us are Logan Simpson. Jen, do you want to say a few words about them? While Jen's unmuting, I will mention, Logan Simpson's a full service planning firm. We're working with their Fort Collins office. We are doing code updates with them in Wellington and Manitou Springs and other places around the state in the Mountain West, including Ada County, Idaho. And they also led the code assessment that's attached to the RFP. So you saw our faces earlier last year when we worked on this project. So Jen, do you want to say a few things about your firm?
Sure. Yeah, I believe I know most of you on the phone, but I'll just do a brief intro about Logan Simpson. We are a full service planning, landscape architecture, environmental planning, and cultural firm. We're about 150 strong in the Intermountain West, around Arizona, Colorado, Utah. Those are our main primary offices. And much like Mark, we do a lot of comprehensive plans, but we also write a lot of code, help update a lot of codes, and are working with White and Smith on a lot of different projects, as Mark mentioned. I think some of our strengths that we bring to the table are our public outreach skills. We do public outreach all over the country, really. And we're always open to trying new techniques and trying to push the envelope and get ahead of things in that regard. And we also specialize in graphic development and really just site analysis, really analyzing the sites. When we write code, it's not just about the language, it's about the application on the land and how that affects the built environment. So we try to take a holistic approach to all of our projects. And I have Melissa Ruth on the phone with me tonight. And I think that's about what we need to say.
Very good. Thanks, Jen. Also joining us, I don't know what your screen looks like, but this may be a little dangerous. We have two Texans on the phone with us tonight. I got Reese Wilson is our planner in our Dallas office. Reese was a staff planner for the city of McKinney, Texas. So it's a similarly situated municipality in the Dallas region. And so Reese has experience not just doing the code drafting stuff with White and Smith, but he's also got hands-on experience working with the codes on the other side of the table. So we're pleased to have him. He's also skilled with graphics, and graphics is an important part of any code update we do. And also joining us is our teaming partner, Kendi Keast. Brett Keast is out of their Houston office. Brett's firm and our firm are very similar. I think between the two of us, we've done over 350 code updates all around the country. Brett and our two firms have collaborated on a lot of code updates around the country, including one for Centennial, Colorado, that was a Colorado APA award winner. They also joined us in Westminster. So we're pleased to have them. He brings a large a group of people who are experienced in code drafting and code analysis with him, and also offers, if the city's interested, this would be an optional thing, Encode, which is an online digital format platform for both drafting and displaying the code and maintaining it over time, which is kind of tricky. So Brett, you want to add anything to what I just said about
Sure, thank you, Mark. Good evening, everybody. Pleased to be with you tonight. As Mark said, we have been in business for 38 years. We've done over 200 code projects and over 200 comprehensive plan projects, like Mark, across 36 states. I've been doing this also for 31 years. We bring a whole complement of staff with a variety of backgrounds, from economics to environmental planning, as well as law, urban design, etc. And we too have done quite a lot of work in Colorado. Mark mentioned that we led the project in Centennial. We have been working in neighboring Littleton for the last 3 years. We did their vision and comprehensive plan, which was updated. And for the last 15 months or so, we've been working on their unified land use code. Public draft will be released on June 8th. So getting close on that one. We're also working in Castle Pines and finishing a code and design guideline project for Winter Park. So between Mark and I, we've probably worked on, I can't even count the number of projects we worked on. We probably have 6 or 8 projects right now that we are collaborating on. So we kind of complement each other in the strengths of each firm, and provide a deep bench of resources.
Very good. Thanks, Brett. So that'll conclude our initial response to your question, Brooke, and I'll turn it back to you and or whoever else on staff has the next question. Thank you.
I believe Will has the next question.
I do. Good evening, everybody. I am Will Charles, Planner 2 with the Community Development Department. And my question for you tonight is, the RFP states a targeted and incremental process for updating the UDC, or Unified Development Code, is envisioned. Please explain your process and how this volume of information will be presented and decisions will be made. Also, how will City Council be involved in your process?
Okay, very good. I'll answer. This question sounds like a two-parter to me, so I'll answer the first one, which is how we make decisions, and addressing the fact that you see this as an incremental process. The way we typically work with cities with a code update is, first of all, the client appoints a project manager. I will serve as our team's project manager. You have a robust public outreach process envisioned as part of the plan, or as part of the RFP. You also had a robust public outreach process as part of the assessment. In doing so, I mean, Englewood's is far from the largest city we've ever worked with, but it's over 34,000 people. A lot of strong opinions in the community about the way things ought to be done and the way things ought not to be done. And there's often, once you proceed on a project like this and you roll up your sleeves, you really dive into the details, you sometimes find too that there are differences of opinion amongst staff, amongst your planning commission, amongst city council on how things ought to be done. So at the end of the day, we work through that public outreach process. We check in routinely with your planning commission, with your city council, with other decision makers, along with the public, giving not just drafts of the code as we unveil them, and we usually do that in modules. We laid out in our proposal different modules from your zoning districts, which are the DNA of the code, your development standards, your processes, and then a final draft that threads it all together. And as we do that, we pick up comments from people. You're never going to unveil your very first draft and everybody goes kumbaya. This is exactly what I was looking for from all 34,000 residents, from everyone on staff, from all of your planning commission, from all of your city council people. Those drafts illuminate a lot of the differences of opinion. They illuminate a lot. They also illuminate a lot of the ways that we can start to resolve some of the differences of opinion about how things ought to be done, and work towards a final draft with language that hits, everybody's hot buttons to the best that we can. But at the end of the day, it's the city's project manager who makes those decisions. We work with the city to check in with the public, to check in with your decision makers, and to work through all of those issue points and decision points that reveal themselves along the way. And so that's a short answer to your first question. The second one is, how we work with the city council, and I alluded to that as well. At strategic points along the process, we have check-in meetings with all of our clients, with the city council. I would also add your planning commission to that as well. The folks who, at the end of the day, have to adopt what it is we're putting together. So they need to know what's coming. They need a good summary of what's in the documents. They often don't have time to read the whole thing word for word. Sometimes you get council members who do that, but we really have to work with them to summarize what's in there, to let them know what the public was telling us along the way, to explain why things are written the way they were and how we arrived at compromised positions and decisions along the way. I think it's important to do that, at least 3, 4, maybe more times going forward over this 18-month period, so that they are aware of all of this before it lands on their desk.
Hey, Mark, if I
Yes,
could contribute real quick.
Sure.
Mark made mention of the Encode Plus, which is the kind of a technology that can be used here. This has been used very effective in Littleton and many other places. Can be used as a project website for one, but we're also able to work in a password protected maintenance module where we can share comments and do track changes amongst each other on staff. And then when we get to the public process, which we'll be launching here in 2 weeks in Littleton, we're able to receive public comments on the draft as well. And we'll basically collect all those comments for us, and we'll be able to sort and review those and then provide responses. And all the comments will be embedded in the draft in a table at the bottom of each section. So it makes it very transparent, and it's a very, very efficient way for everybody to see what's being commented and to collect all those comments. So that would be a use of Encode Plus in this application.
Good. Thanks, Brett. And that's a tool that can help us if the city chooses to go forward with it. So we've, like Brett said, we're using that on a lot of projects. Oklahoma City, Loudoun County, Virginia, Chesterfield County, Virginia is starting up with it right now, or 3 projects that Brett and I are working together on with Encode, and it's been quite useful. I think that just to have the commenting feature online that everyone has who's involved in drafting the ordinance has access to, and then when we get to the public facing ordinance, that even members of the general public can comment on. So thanks, Will. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. I think the next question goes to John.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Voberil. I'm a senior long-range planner in the Community Development Department. My question is, the RFP asked for a designated facilitator for public meetings. Who on your team will fulfill this role? What is their approach and experience in discussing difficult and diverse land use opinions and building consensus?
Great. Well, I'll let Jen speak up in a second, but I see Logan Simpson as our lead on public outreach, and they are expert facilitators. I can also tell you that both Brett and I have done quite a bit of that as well. I spend a lot of time leading meetings, leading stakeholder meetings, focus groups, public workshops, check-in sessions with your decision makers, and et cetera. So all of us, all three of us can fulfill that role on this firm. And Jen, do you want to talk a little bit about how you plan to work with public outreach?
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark, you hit the nail on the head. All three, Brett, Mark, and I are facilitators and do have to facilitate difficult conversations. We do that by asking a lot of questions and really talking with people. I find in a public meeting, the best course, if someone has a very strong feeling or opinion, is to just sit and talk to them and start to dissect that idea a little bit and start to apply it to on the ground situations to try to get to some sort of solution or talk through some options. And we find a lot of times, and we did this actually on the code assessment to some degree, is putting out optional approaches. So putting forward, we could go this route, or this route. Which one do you feel would work best for you or for the community? And then we can kind of decipher from there. I think with this project, since we've done a fair bit of outreach already for the assessment, we would be looking at still continuing to get the word out on the project and what the code is, and trying to, now that things are opening up a little bit more from COVID, I think we have some additional opportunities to get out in person. I think we would try to use more of an ambassador approach, where we might have certain ambassadors of different neighborhoods, and that could be some of the people that are more passionate about certain subjects. And so we could use them to try to get the word out. And then I think we would use focus groups, reach out to people on specific topics that we're discussing, and try to keep the conversations a little more focused to the topic at hand. So does that answer the question? Do you have anything else to ask about that?
Well, Jandy, I'd like to add just a couple more points to what you said. Our approach to facilitating a project like this is first of all to listen, and second of all, it's to summarize the decisions that are going to be difficult. I mean, the low-hanging fruit stuff is easy, and we can sit down and start drafting your code tomorrow based on what we know about that narrow universe of things you have in Englewood that are low-hanging fruit. The hard part is to listen to all the different diverse points of view, different stakeholders, neighborhood residents, developers, et cetera, and to really list out and to summarize the issues that are the most difficult, the ones that are holding things back. And, even with staff, sometimes, differences of opinion that come up. The tool Brett mentioned is a good way of doing that, to collect, those comments. It's a good way to summarize people, and the nice thing too, is it's in their own words. I take notes like crazy. I don't know if any of you saw the notes I took from our meetings in Englewood. If I ever lose this job, I'm going to become a court stenographer, I think, because it's just a nervous habit of mine. But I'm a good listener. I have no ego. I don't think I've won an argument in 27 years. I don't go into processes like these to argue with people. I go into processes like these to listen and to summarize and to understand what people are telling me. That's critical. And it's a different audience too when you get to zoning updates. When you do a comprehensive plan, by the way, Logan Simpson did your comprehensive plan too. So nobody knows this, no planning firm out there knows the city better than Logan Simpson does. We talk about a comprehensive plan, and even when you're talking about the code assessment, it's a different audience. I mean, you get a lot of people thinking big thoughts, thinking at 30,000 feet. They're not scared yet about things because we're talking about broad policy. We're talking about what we want new development to look like in our city, those sorts of things. But when we start talking about the development standards, it brings a lot of new people to the table. And it's a different way. It's often a set of skills to manage people. You have to be prepared to listen to people who are angry, to people who are scared, to people who are skeptical and distrustful. And a lot of the why are we doing this kinds of people? Because one thing, I know a lot of people are excited to move this forward, to go to the next step for this city and to update the code. But, two things I find, the two things everybody hates are their existing development code and anything that changes their existing development code, especially sometimes the people who use it on a day-to-day basis. So, we want to make sure that, well, as we go forward, I think that the strength that I have, that Jen has, and that Brett has, is that we're good listeners. We're not the big personality types who are going to come in and tell you how to do things. Although we do have a lot of ideas, we have a lot of experience. We've seen different ways of applying things before, but we don't have like our canned approach that we're going to come in and give you. So we're good at writing the code that you want, because at the end of the day, that's our job. So that's just a couple of add-ons to what Jen, I think, had to say about facilitating and the importance of serving in that role and how you serve in that role when it comes to the code update, which is the law of the land now, as opposed to the comp plan. So thanks, John. I hope that answered your questions, and I look forward to the next one.
Yes, thank you. I believe Eric has the next question.
Hi, I'm Eric Sampson, Planner 2 with Community Development. So the city is building a project webpage using the Bang the Table platform. The RFP requires the selected consultant to provide weekly updates, graphics, and other information to keep the project website current and the public engaged. Who on your team will provide this content? And could you explain the type of weekly information that the city can expect from you guys?
Certainly, I think all of us are going to help with that, especially when it comes to keeping the project going on a weekly basis. I think it's an all hands on deck approach. I know Reese and Melissa will help a lot with that, with asking questions. That's a good use of a resource like Bang the Table, is asking really pointed questions that create a dialogue for folks. And they're good at doing that. And I know Logan Simpson, one of their specialties is public outreach. So they're going to help us, keep the website something that's dynamic. Jen, you want to add to that?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot to add. We'll do whatever content is appropriate at the moment. So as Mark said, post quick polls and questions. There's Bang the Table. We've worked with Bang the Table a lot over our years. They have some great mapping tools. So when we get into specific areas or looking at, neighborhoods and looking at maybe specific design guidelines for specific areas, we can have people pin maps in areas or put pins on the map and give a comment. There's idea walls. Those are usually more in comprehensive plans, so that we'd probably be a little more targeted with this one. But weekly updates could include, where we're at in the process, any upcoming meetings. We typically do you guys have seen a lot of the graphics that we do, but we do, little infographics and fun ways to try to engage the community, so that if you get directed to the website, when you get on there, it's easy to navigate. We're actually beta testing a tool with Bang the Table right now. It's a text polling tool. It's working really successfully, so that might be another tool that we could help you out with. But we've done quite a bit with Bang the Table. It does have some limitations with imagery, we have found, with visual preference type surveys, but we've found some workarounds with that. So it's a pretty useful tool, and we're very well versed in it. So
thanks, Jen. And I can also tell you, as three firms who do work all over the country, we have a very robust image library from places all over the country. So if you need an example of something, it's likely that between the three of us, there is an image that we can use that's not protected by somebody else's copyright. We're free to put it on the website. And it's something that comes often from somewhere else. So we're not singling out somebody's property and making them mad. Because I'm sure you're aware of how easy it is to make people mad when the word zoning comes up. So we always want to avoid that. So thank you. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, certainly. John, thanks, back to you.
Describe the approach you will take to expand mixed-use areas beyond current boundaries, or establish new missing middle style regulations in transitional areas?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, there are several ways to do that, and we alluded to them in the report. And I think we need a little bit, and I'm glad you got more dialogue planned out in the RFP, because we'll need more community discussion on how we make that happen. One is to just either create a new zoning district, or to revise your existing district regulations to make it easier to do the right thing with new standards that accommodate that style of development, with build two lines, frontage build out, all the active uses on the ground floor, whatever standards we need to achieve that development outcome, but also being mindful of this community's attention to the scale of development and how it transitions into existing neighborhoods. So, our approach is, whether we do it through new district regulations, by adding modular or composite standards to your existing regulations and expanding the zoning map, we have to have two things. One is that set of design metrics and dimensional standards that make sure that that outcome is what happens and not something else. Not just setting a zero setback only to see, somebody load their frontage with a surface parking lot. We need to make sure that all of those standards are working in concert with each other and deliver that outcome. And secondly, is looking at a robust set of tools for transition. And that's important as well. Transitions in scale, transitions that don't just rely on the old-fashioned landscape buffer. We need to make sure that that's incorporated as well, so that development, as it approaches your existing neighborhoods in a community that's almost entirely built out, is sensitive to what's around it. Jen, is there anything you want to add, from the assessment?
I'd like to contribute on what we've done in Littleton, since it's right next door and shares a lot of characteristics. Their comp plan identified a projected population of 15,000 additional people. It's over 6,000 additional dwelling units. And so our job was to try to figure out, how do we accommodate those, and making sure that we're providing for a variety of housing types and different living formats that can meet the needs of, everybody in town. Their employers have surveyed and said that they have less and less confidence in the availability of housing for their employees. So this is a big issue. So generally, we identified all the areas up and down Santa Fe and some of Broadway as corridor mixed use. And so therefore, what was commercial, we're introducing residential, which provides for, additional living options. We've also expanded the palette of different housing types and identified ways. We're talking about accessory dwelling units, very sensitive topic. We have talked about, or further expanded their definition of a single family attached to get into multiplexes and townhomes and row houses. We've talked about ways that they can do duplex conversions. We've kind of put the whole universe of ideas out there, and now the community is starting to work through them to decide, how do these work in context to our neighborhoods? Where do they fit the best? How do we meet, affordability goals without, upsetting the character of the community? So we've identified like 600 acres of property that will now provide for mixed use. And of course, we've got mixed use design standards. And there are already properties that are strip centers set at the back of the property with 1,000 parking places in front that are already bringing plans in based upon the code and going to create mixed use centers with walkable traditional main streets and things like that. So see it really transforming a lot of areas within Littleton. So I think there's a lot of application there in Englewood as well.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
So this is Brooke again, and before I ask the next question, we are halfway through the questions and a little bit more than halfway through our time. So I think we're doing all right, but we want to keep this same pace at least. And What we're trying to do is leave about 15 minutes towards the end of our time for some questions from the steering committee and even some questions from your team. So here is the next question. Will existing local neighborhood conditions be analyzed, including housing age, quality, conditions, and size?
Yes, we did some of that in the assessment report. I mean, it's not a detailed analysis, like you would do with a historic survey or something like that. That's something, given the timing of this project and the budget that's assigned to it, that, the specifics of what you said suggest a broader study, than we would do as part of the code update. But based on information you've got, based on information in the assessment report and what we already know about the city from Logan Simpson's work with the comp plan, with our work on the assessment, that's the information that we would use, and how we would draw lines and analyze the best approach to existing neighborhood development and development around existing neighborhoods in the city.
One of the simple things that we did in Littleton was an analysis. We'd identified over 350 properties that are non-conforming by reason of lot area. In other words, what the zoning provides for, the lot area is too small. So we went in and started looking at all their zoning districts and consolidating districts and kind of realigning or recalibrating their districts to eliminate the vast majority of those nonconformities. So there's a lot of things that we can do with GIS and aerial analysis to start identifying what the character neighborhoods are, so that we're careful when we're designing new regulations to preserve that character and to enhance it if there should be any infill or adjacent development.
Thanks, Brett. Good. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And I believe Will has the next question.
My question for you guys is, how will you manage the creation or potential creation of non-conforming lots during the update process? So you touched on it a little bit, but we'll see.
Certainly. Yeah, and Brett just to describe the approach that he used in Littleton next door, and we can tap into your GIS capabilities to assess the breadth of those issues, as well as assessing different different tools to make sure that we don't create new nonconformities unless that's intentional, unless we're deliberately want to force a different outcome over time. We can give you those tools as well if the city wanted to aggressively go in that direction. So, that's part analysis is, describing based on, what you want your code to look like, what picture that paints for the city in terms of any existing nonconformities that would create, and then how we deal with those. And there's a lot of different tools ranging from very, very aggressive, amortizing existing uses, for example, is one approach, but it can be controversial to, just acknowledging situations that are there and don't literally conform to all the standards in our ordinance as conforming uses, which allows them to go about their business. We can let them expand without calling them non-conforming up to a certain amount. So different approaches to that as well. And in a city as complicated as Englewood can be, we may be using a variety of those in the code when it's finally written.
Our role with Mark is commonly to do the analysis of all your districts and lot sizes, and to help reconcile your districts with your comp plan policies, land use plan, etc. And in so doing, taking great care to make sure that we are eliminating rather than contributing to the number of nonconformities, and where there are nonconformities, giving them a path forward to conformity where that works. A lot of times it was nothing of their doing. It was inherited and it's been there forever. And in some cases, people are visiting businesses or what have you, and they've been there for many years and there's no problem with them. So why on paper should they be quote unquote non-conforming? So we usually try to, remedy that by, discovering how many there are, where they are, and what the cause of them is.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you. I believe the next question is John's.
How many public meetings or steering committee meetings are you willing to commit to within your proposed budget? Do you envision any in-person meetings, or are you simply planning digital format meetings only?
I know the RFP talked about 12 to 14, something like that. If we're fortunate enough to be selected, that number of meetings will be driven by the budget, and we don't know, exactly what, we know what your ceiling is, but we don't know what the final number is going to be. So our proposal, hit that mark. I think, some of those are going to be digital, and with Logan Simpson's presence in Colorado, a number are going to be in person as well. We'll sort that out, if we're selected. We don't have the, a specific number of digital and a specific number of in-person at this time. That would go to the next step. That would go to the negotiation process. But I think we can hit the mark that's in the RFP. For that 12 to 14 meetings, and how many are digital and how many or virtual, and how many are in person is going to depend on that final number.
Thank you. I guess then we'll have Eric up for number 9.
So could you explain how you will model difficult land use concepts such as bulk plan regulations in a way that is understandable to a person just learning about planning and zoning concepts?
Good question. Yes, the bulk plan is not easy to read on paper, I think, even for a planner. And Logan Simpson already did some graphics in the code assessment. And, as we move forward and decide, what that tool ends up looking like, both figuratively and literally, I anticipate that we're going to deal with that 2 ways. One is the visual part, those 3-dimensional graphics that Logan Simpson did, that we can build on, that we can adjust. They're vector drawings, so they're easy to revise going forward. And then, believe it or not, even though I have a law degree, I am very, very ardent about writing in a way that's user-friendly. And so I think both the visual and the written text has to, you have to do both of those in a way that that's easy for the general public to understand. And so my writing style is almost no passive voice ever, using the easiest language that we can get away with to describe what's required of applicants, doing a lot of lists and tables and white space, and describing things without using, a single run-on paragraph like you'd see in an old legal contract. So we would employ all of that, as well as, placing that graphic on the same page as the text. So when you read it, it'll be there, it'll be labeled, there'll be call outs and things like that, so that folks who, people who are reading their first zoning ordinance, will be on the same playing field as the attorneys and the engineers and the architects who use the code.
It's probably worth mentioning also that through the process, you can explore alternatives to the bulk plane. Mark mentioned transition standards earlier. There's a number of ways that you can get to the same conclusion without using the bulk plane. It's probably easier to understand. So that's part of that drafting and give and take, and having conversations to figure out, what staff wants to use and administer, what makes the most sense, and what will be most effective on the ground.
Thanks, Brett.
All right, thanks. And then for the last question, back to Brooke.
Okay, we're at the last question, and it is, how will you modernize the current UDC?
Ooh, can I take that one? Mark?
Great question. Well, I'll take the initial stab, Brett, and then I'll turn it over to you. Well, we're going to do this in several ways. Number one, we're going to make sure it's organized in a way that makes the information easier to find. So we're going to make it user friendly. I mean, you have a UDC that for its time, was a fairly modern document, and used a lot of contemporary metrics to regulate development that use some document layout tools and so on and so forth. But what we're going to work with you to make sure that it's laid out in a way that's easier for people to find the information they need, and that uses modern tools of technology to describe and present and display the code that makes it easy for the general public to find, that includes clickable hyperlinks and vector graphics and all kinds of things that you see in a contemporary modern development code. And if you choose to use encode, it's going to be even better. You're going to have robust tools, not just to hyperlink to different parts of the code, to inner formulas that describe how much on right there on that page that'll tell an applicant how much parking is needed, for example, or how wide their landscape buffers, if those are required in a given location, have to be, and those sorts of things. But there'll be ways to hyperlink to other parts of the code, to hyperlink to state statutes, and so on and so forth. And for those of you who are scared of modern technology, one thing I really like about encode when I've used it is it generates PDF and Word documents. And the Word documents, you have all the headings in text. So, when I write things in Word, I use the navigation pane a lot to get back and forth between different parts of the code. And encode does that, unlike some other other resources where it just gives you a Word document, but it's not formatted and et cetera. So Brett, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I realize encode wasn't what was asked for, but that's kind of our specialty and really the purpose of what it is. Basically, we can take your code and put it into a full web-based interactive format that we can accommodate unique page layouts, tables, and graphics, and manipulate those. What Mark was talking about is we have a whole series of tools where we can integrate 3D GIS maps, so you can link back and forth between the text of the code and the map, either from clicking on an address or entering an address and finding out all the applicable regulations, or the other way around. We can do indexing, where we can take everything that pertains to a topic, say it's affordable housing, and it will basically pull all provisions that relate to that topic into a single document, or everything that relates to a certain district and pull it all into a document, so a developer has everything they need in one spot. We have development calculators, Mark talking about, for calculating landscaping and floor area and signage and parking and everything else. But we also have a lot of flexibility in how it's designed, so we can set up mega menus and help people to, if you're a citizen, here's your issues, and help them navigate there. Or if you're a developer or an engineer, click here. We can use frequently asked questions. And so there's just a whole lot of things that we can do to help people navigate and find what they're looking for in the shortest amount of time and with the least amount of pain. And at the same time, brand your document. And then it's hosted in the cloud, so you can update it yourself going forward. You can publish it out to the web yourself going forward. It's set up in a Word-like format. So it doesn't require any web knowledge at all. Any one of us on this call could go in and, manipulate, add, change, save, publish, codify, what have you. So be happy to show it to you, or we can send some examples to you of what we've done in some other places.
Thanks, Brett. Great. Well, I hope that answers your questions, and we're available for any further questions, either from staff or from the steering committee.
Thank you, Mark. We appreciate your presentation this evening. And at this point, I'd open it up for any of the steering committee members. If you had any questions that you thought up, or any other follow-up information that you would like to get from the the White and Smith team.
I have a question. Can you go into further detail about, to put it bluntly, can you explain how we're not going to just get what you've already done, the work you've done for Littleton, and you just cross out the name Littleton and put Englewood at the top? Can you go into further detail on how you would differentiate Englewood and Littleton?
Yes. Well, first of all, as was laid out in the RFP, and given our work with Logan Simpson on the assessment report, we already have a good sense of what the city wants. We know our way around your existing code. We kind of have a sense coming in of the things the city wants to keep and the things the city wants to get rid of and the things the city wants to modernize. I never cut and paste a code that I've done somewhere else. Have never done it for any other of my other 150 code update clients. So we just don't work that way. In fact, if I did, it would ultimately make my life harder because it wouldn't be the code this city wants at all. You wouldn't be very happy with it. So we start out by outlining, the new code, and we do a correspondence table. So sometimes, and oftentimes, and I anticipate we'll probably work that way here. We just take your existing code and start rewriting it. So if there's a base we're building on, it's this one. But we're rewriting this code using modern tools, using our drafting expertise, doing original graphics. Like I said, a lot, the graphics we do for our code are vector. The codes we write are vector graphics, so they were done around the dimensional standards that are in your table. They're not just a graphic we copied from another community. So yeah, that's our plan. We never cut and paste. We just don't do that.
And especially the Littleton code.
Yes. Yeah, you would know immediately where they came from.
Yeah, you would. That would be a big mistake.
That's right.
I'd like to ask, what's your approach for integrating environmental sustainability into the code? And do you happen to have a couple examples?
Certainly. There's two ways I look at this. One is organic sustainability. If we do what was asked earlier, I think John asked the question, how do we incorporate mixed use development? Mixed use development is typically more compact. It makes better use of land. It's an environment where people can walk to places they want to go instead of having to drive, or where they can use your light rail station and use that to get to other places in the region. So that kind of codification and making that kind of development easy is organically sustainable. It organically makes better use of energy resources, and just for environmental protection and et cetera. But there are other tools we can build in as well. If we want to build sustainability into, we want to encourage, for example, more sustainable landscaping practices, more sustainable building materials, and so forth. There's different ways we can do that. One is an incentive-based system. And we've worked, for example, in the DC area, where we've created incentives and point systems and things like that, where developers can get rewarded, not just by more density and more height and things like that, because sometimes that's not the right tool. It's not the appropriate tool. And sometimes that's not even what developers want. It can be coverage. It can be reduction in minimum parking requirements. I know that was a hot topic in the assessment. And I know there are a lot of different points of view in the city about whether we continue that practice or not. And we can tag point metrics to, for example, to new development if we want to be aggressive. Golden has an approach like that we made part of the draft Westminster Code that we're discussing with them and that's under discussion with them right now. So that's an approach we can use if the city wants to go that way. But looking at those two things, the important thing too is to identify, because sustainability is a very I'm just going to say it's kind of a vague concept sometimes. We really need to sit down, if that's the approach that Englewood wants to take, decide what sustainability means to Englewood. I mean, what is it that Englewood wants to achieve with this concept? Do you want to is it just making the community more walkable? Is it the other aspects of green development that I mentioned? Is it, better ways to manage your landscaping or to address stormwater issues? And we have to make that list and then come up with the best tools to get there with you. So that's our approach at the end of the day is the first conversation is what does that whole concept mean? And then it's identifying those tools.
It's really part of the foundation. I mean, it's part of what we do. Make sure that we're drafting in a sustainable way.
So we wanted to leave some time for your questions, but I did have one, as you could probably figure out as the director of the department and somebody who has to manage our overall budget and that type of thing. Well, maybe without going into specifics, I'm not looking for a dollar amount, but the Encode add-on or the Encode ability for us to incorporate. Could you give us a sense, maybe from a similar size community with similar size kind of code issues, what the order of magnitude that we're talking about in terms of that addition?
Yeah, we set it up, Brad, so that there's a one-time build fee. So we would take your current unified code and migrate it into the software, building all the hover over pop-up definitions and hyperlinks and style sheets and all that type of stuff. So that's a one-time cost that's based upon the number of pages. And then beyond that, we have about 25 individual features, and you can pick and choose what you choose to add and when you want to add them. So it can be, as little as a handful of $1,000 to, low teens. And we've got some that, have gone all the way up to, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 grand when they take everything that we have and put every document that they own into it. It's a full content management system, codification system, and document management. So in Littleton, we put their entire city code in it. We're putting all the design guides in it, the engineering design standards. And that way we can stitch everything together, link everything together. So if there's references, you can click and go right to them. So we'd be happy to kind of spell that out. It doesn't have to be expensive, but you can add on it at any time if you choose.
Okay, thanks, Brad. I appreciate that. So we do have just a few minutes. Are there one or two questions that you want to ask of us?
Certainly. I don't have that many since we've already been around the horn on the code assessment. Do you anticipate much turnover over the next 18 months or so in terms of staff, the planning commission, your city council going forward?
Well, I think that's a completely unpredictable question
Certainly.
to definitively answer. As far as the staff is concerned, I think we've been in place for a decent amount of time here, and we appreciate the fact that I think there's a lot of commitment on our staff to the future of this community. I would say that our project manager for this project, Wade Burkholder, is not with us this evening. He was called out of town to attend to a family matter. So he will be back next week and taking control of the project. So I neglected to mention that at the beginning. Okay. As far as the Planning Commission, they are on a rotational basis as well, but we have a lot of new members that I think have been appointed in the last year or so. That'll be a good long tenure for this project and beyond. City Council, we do have an election this November, and there are several seats that are up. One of those members is termed out, our mayor. Linda Olson has served her full complement of terms, so there'll definitely be one new member, and there's quite certainly could be more if some others choose not to run or if there's other candidates. But so we will have a new council in mid-November to work with on this project to see it through.
Great, thanks, Brad. I don't have any other questions. Brad or Jen, do you all have any questions?
No, I don't.
Okay, great.
Well, thank you all again to Mark, to Brett, to Jen, Melissa, Reese. Thank you for your time this evening. We appreciate your presentation. It was very informative. We appreciate the good questions that you asked of us. And so if you wouldn't mind excusing yourselves at this point, if the committee could stay on for a few minutes, we have a few wrap-up discussions to have. So again,
Awesome.
thank you very much. We'll be in touch with you soon.
Yes. Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Best of luck
Bye.
to you.
Thank you.
So folks, I know it's been a long evening and I don't want to belabor it. So what we won't do tonight is ask you to do your score sheets. I'll talk about that in a minute, but I think it would be helpful in the 15 or so minutes that we have left scheduled to just maybe turn it over to you all at this point to see if you have any initial reactions in terms of the strengths and challenges of some of the groups or of both of the groups, or hopefully if you have some observations, we'd love to hear them. And even if you have some preferences, we'd like to know that this evening so we can be timely as we can going forward. So I won't be calling on folks, but you've heard a lot this evening. There's a lot to digest, but if you do have any initial comments or observations, we'd be all ears in terms of the staff here.
I have a quick comment. Both these firms seem as if they've worked on current code updates. It would be nice, I think, to maybe have either some links or actually copies of some finished product that they've actually created.
Okay. Others, come on. What's your sense? What'd you hear?
I felt that Gould Evans was both better prepared and better at the reactionary, both the questions they answered and the questions that they asked. In my line of work, a word we use a lot is hungry. Who is more hungry between two companies competing? Who feels like they really want it, that they're going to really put the work in. And to me, it did feel like White and Smith, didn't customize their presentation as much, and in their RFP response, the projects that they included didn't seem like a particular match for what we're looking at versus the ones that were included by Gould Evans.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, and I noticed that Gould Evans team, that they included someone who is going to be able to advise on economic feasibility and some of the redevelopment issues that were called out in the RFP. And I didn't see quite anything like that on the other team as well. And I also noticed the Gould Evans team had identified some specific staff that had maybe more of the design and graphic capability than they did on the other team, although I think they both had it, but they definitely had a better, they had more to say about their approach, not just that it'd be vector-based, but about showing context and that kind of thing. So there were definitely some distinctive things about that first team.
Okay, thank you, Amy.
Yeah, I agree with both of those previous comments. I had the same impression from Gould Evans about the specificity and clarity of their responses. I don't mind telling you that I was partial to their responses as well. I think they share a similar philosophy that I do about the vision of Englewood and how to implement this type of project. My notes are all over the place, so forgive me for being scattered in my responses, but yeah, I think that sums it up. I was just very impressed with the specificity of their responses and the emphasis on simplicity and not focusing efforts on things that don't need to be changed or improved upon.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Suzanne. Appreciate that.
I would agree with both of the comments already made. And I was particularly struck by Matt on Gould Evans' team that it's important to explain the why behind the code. I think that's very important because we do have a quite opinionated community, and going into and being willing to acknowledge that the why is a very important part of any part of change. I give them a heads up. I also kind of felt like you did, Noel, that White and Smith felt to me like they felt like they had an upper hand because they'd worked with the city so much before, and maybe weren't as individualized in their presentation as Golden Evans. So.
Thank you, Michelle. Kate, Christine, anybody else want to weigh in?
I really liked Golden Evans' simple, logical, practical approach to how they would go about it. Just starting very simple with how they said I would start with the table of contents and going from there and mapping what's in the existing code to what would be in the new code, and those sorts of ways to go about it.
I also wrote down simplicity as something that stuck out to me, a way that we can kind of draft this new code to be digestible for a bunch of different audiences. So it's more inclusive to the community. And another thing that I wrote down, like about the bulk claim, for example. And then I also liked their like local and collaborative approach, that they seemed excited to come out here from Missouri to visit Colorado. And also they seemed excited that Zoom was an opportunity to meet even more. So I was impressed by them overall.
Okay, thank you. Jill?
Yeah, when I listened to Golden Evans, my impression overall was they seem great. Like I didn't find anything that stood out to me as a negative. It wasn't until about halfway through the second group that I was like, I don't know, they don't seem to quite be like forward thinking. I don't know if I want to say this, but they almost seem old school in the way that, and the question that was asked of both groups about sustainability seemed to throw them off and be more like, well, what do you guys want? As opposed to yes, which Golden Evans was very much like, yes, this is interwoven into everything that we do. And that I thought was really important. So I know everyone is kind of going in that direction, but I agree with everyone that by the end of it, I was very clear. Golden Evans was my preference.
Okay, thank you. Carl, do you have anything to weigh in on?
I didn't have I came in late on the meeting. I had a old friend had a death in his family, so I didn't think I was going to actually make the meeting, but came in kind of late, but I was pretty impressed with the way they made their presentations, and I don't know, I don't really have an opinion on either one.
Okay.
As one over the other, because I didn't really the first one that much. Sorry about that.
Not a problem, understood. Did I miss anybody? I don't think so.
Are you able to share your impressions or other staff members?
Well, I'll just weigh in. I think the consensus is pretty strong here as well on our staff in terms of the qualities that Golden Evans showed. I like the idea of the hunger. I thought that was readily apparent. I also appreciated their willingness to engage at the levels we need them to over time. Kate, you mentioned going that extra step with the meetings. I think that's huge for us to know that we would have that resource available. So the other thing is just getting out in the community. That was said as well. And I think also looking at requisite examples in real time, and that might involve some field trips. I think that would be really, really interesting. And also taking a look at things that are maybe working here in this community. I think we maybe don't do that enough and appreciate that enough. And if we have things that are working well here, we should celebrate that. And I think if we can help the community kind of discover itself through this process, that would be a great outcome in addition to having the code. So I don't want to preclude anybody else on the staff, but I think that the consensus that you all showed was something that I would agree with as well.
May I ask a question?
Of course.
So my question is about question number 10. And it may be moot since we do seem to have a consensus at this point. But I feel like the applicants responded to this question in 2 different ways. So it's the question about modernization. How would you modernize the current code? And I interpreted it to mean, how would you modernize the content or context of the code? And that's how Gould Evans responded. And I feel like White and Smith responded to, how would you modernize the platform for the code? Mm-hmm. Did anyone else have that perception? Did I misinterpret the spirit of the question? I just wanted to open it up for dialogue and see what people thought.
Yeah, I was really impressed by Gould Evans' answer on that one, just because it did seem to tie back to the comp plan, which was really interesting. And it did seem to just say it depends on the section that we're talking about. And it was about the content, which I feel like is what we're about here. Yeah, and I don't know about getting upsold on a platform if that's what we were looking for.
Yeah, I had actually written down, are they answering the question? And as they went on, I realized, oh, they're answering a different question. So I don't know what the intent was, but nonetheless, I would have answered it the same as Gould Evans, and that group answered the question I had in my mind.
And 5 years down the road, nobody is happy that they put content in a proprietary system, because it's usually difficult to get out.
That's a very good point, Noel, because you're right. If we rely on a proprietary system, you either have to reinvent the wheel on your own, or you're stuck.
Any additional comments?
I mean, the one thing I'll say about White and Smith is that with Logan Simpson on their team, it did seem like they were more prepared to talk about banging the table. But I did really like what the Gould Evans team talked about in terms of video and what that could bring. So that was not too much distinctive. I don't know one or the other there, but.
Okay.
I would like to share my favorite line of the evening, which is to identify the fewest key things that make a neighborhood great and focus on those. And then residents are more open to other things being mixed in. This is obviously paraphrasing. I know they really stress regulate the fewest key components and do those well. I really like that kind of, really shoot for what you're aiming for, and the rest kind of will follow.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that whole piece of their presentation was to simplify and achieve the objectives. Simply illustrate and document, not overly technical, illustrate through design, visual review versus technical descriptions, and then also visit the neighborhoods and engage with a broader group of people. I think all of that was pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Bernie.
Yeah. And I'll add that I agree too. I'm a huge proponent of the Pareto principle, and that came to mind time and time again as Gould Evans was presenting.
Okay, well, obviously there's a pretty strong consensus here for the Gould Evans group, and we will definitely head in that direction. That being said, you have one other important assignment that's related to this part of the process, which is it would help us greatly if each of you, and Carl, I understand maybe we could excuse you because you did miss a significant portion of it. So it'd be hard to do the comparison on your part, but I appreciate your comments tonight. But if those of you who were here for the entirety, if you could complete those 2 score sheets and email them hopefully sometime tomorrow to Nancy Fenton, and she's nfenton@englewoodco.gov. That would really help us, and especially help our procurement department to make sure that we followed the process that we anticipated this evening, and that we had a really good cross-section of folks from the community to do this scoring and to select the firm that we will go forward with. But we clearly heard your consensus. We'll definitely head in that direction. But if you could do that sometime between this evening and tomorrow afternoon, it would help us greatly. So with that, we can wrap up for this evening. On behalf of the staff, just want to really appreciate your time this evening. Hopefully you got energized. I certainly did by both presentations. And now the fun can start in about hopefully a month or so when we have our firm under contract and we could start to really get into the nitty gritty of this. And I just want to say, for the planning commissioners who are here and the steering commissioners who are appointed, or steering committee members who are appointed by council, we're really looking forward to working with you on this project. It is of supreme importance to the future of the community. So we appreciate your commitment to going forward with us. So if there are not any other questions or comments, go for it, Christine.
Have you scheduled when our next meeting is?
I'm going to discuss that with Wade in terms of the going forward. The next process that will kind of happen is the staff will work on the contract and the scope of services with the select consultant. And we need to get this approved by the city council because it's over our threshold for what staff can approve administratively. We actually have to take that to the city council, and that will hopefully happen in the next month or so. So once we have the contract approved, we'll definitely be in touch with everybody about the schedule for going forward.
What do you think is the soonest our next meeting would be if all the stars aligned with the schedule?
I would say probably, well, we're meeting according to the Planning Commission schedule. Even though these meetings are not meetings of the Planning Commission, they'll be every other Tuesday, and we can talk about the times as we go forward, but for a couple hours, as the Planning Commission schedule permits them to operate. So hopefully, as very soon after that contract is settled, we can get on that next rotation of the first and third Tuesdays in the month, is I think the plan at this point. But I do want to confer with Wade when he's back, and we'll definitely get you a set schedule as soon as we know it. Michelle.
Sounds good.
Brad, so I'm clear, is City Council going to look at the tape of this meeting, or is our joint decision between staff and this group going to be the recommendation to City Council?
Yes, the basis of what happened this evening will serve as the basis for our recommendation to the City Council. I think it's an excellent idea to maybe include the recording of this meeting as an attachment. So if they're inclined to look at the interviews, they certainly can.
Okay.
I think that's an excellent
great
suggestion. But our recommendation will be based on the consensus that was reached tonight.
Okay. And I give our best to Wade. I know he's been in and out of town, I think for personal reasons, and I don't know what's going on, but I just want to say give our best to him.
Appreciate that, Michelle. And we will do that.
Brad, could I interject for a second?
Of course.
So based on the tentative schedule that Wade had developed, he was planning on July 7th just to do a UDC overview before the contract was finalized. So that, Christine, to answer your question, probably the earliest will be July 7th.
Great.
Okay.
Any other comments for tonight?
Well, to be clear, July 7 appears to be a Wednesday.
It does, and that's
Okay.
because council will move to Tuesday and we meet after them.
Because of the
following,
holiday.
because of the holiday, yes.
Understood. Thank you for clarifying.
Of course.
Okay, all. Again, thank you. We're looking forward to seeing you soon. I appreciate your time tonight. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. You too.